A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support. I remember the day everything changed like it was yesterday. The warm sun spilled into my college dorm room as I balanced my classes, endless readings, and the issues of friends with the routine of my freshman year. I had finally settled into my independence, reveling in the freedom of living away from home. But then I got a call from my older sister, Clara, who was already struggling to take care of her fast-growing baby, Emily, after an unexpected breakup with her boyfriend. Clara was at her wit's end. "Can I crash at your place for a while? Just until I get back on my feet?" she asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. I felt a pang of guilt, knowing she was in a tough spot, but the dread sank in as well. My dorm was tiny, meant for two, and seriously incapable of accommodating a baby and a grown adult. I hesitated, my mind racing through everything I'd already navigated in my new life. "Clara, the dorm is really small. It's a shared space, and I think it would be cramped for you and Emily," I finally replied, steeling myself against the disappointment I could sense through the phone. The silence felt thick, oppressive. "You don't understand," she countered, her voice rising slightly. "I have nowhere else to go. I need your help." I felt the walls closing in on me. I could already picture the messy diapers, constant feedings, the late-night crying mixed with my 8 a.m. classes and the frenetic energy of college life. I couldn't see how it could remotely work without it spiraling into chaos. She responded with thinly veiled indignation, "So this is what family means to you? Just ditching me when things get tough?" The accusation stung. I found myself wanting to explain that she was my sister, that I loved her, that my legs were shaking as I stood my ground, but even as she continued to push, I felt my chest tighten. An internal battle unfolded, each memory of the time she had supported me, every sacrifice she made boiling down to my refusal to be the safety net she desperately needed. Still, I knew I was doing the right thing, preserving my own mental space, yet shame burned in my stomach like acid. I could only muster a small, "I'm really sorry, but I just can't," before she hung up. The next day felt hollow. I went to classes and tried to focus, but Clara's words echoed in my mind, clouding any joy I previously felt about college. Days passed, and our relationship became strained. I received the occasional text filled with disappointment and frustration. The more time that passed, the heavier the ache between us felt. What I really couldn't shake was the nagging thought, was I the asshole? Maybe family meant being stretched beyond breaking for one another, but my dorm felt like a prison designed to choke the last waves of independence I had left. I steered clear of social media, hoping my peers' endless joys wouldn't twist the knife deeper, but I spent nights tossing in bed, replaying the moment over and over in my mind. In the end, Clara found a temporary place to stay with a mutual friend. We talked through it one night, frustration spilling over like the brim of a glass that had been too full. "You hurt me," she said softly, the anger replaced with vulnerability. It hit me hard. I had, in some way, shifted the burden of her struggles onto my own shoulders, intending to protect myself while causing her pain. I apologized, genuinely this time, realizing we weren't at war but traversing different battles. We both cried, sharing our vulnerabilities, and in that raw, open moment, I understood, sometimes being the good sister doesn't mean rescuing, sometimes it means being honest, even if it hurts both of you. Now, months later, we're not back to where we were, but there's a new understanding, and perhaps a tentative acceptance that we both have our paths to navigate, and sometimes those paths don't intersect as neatly as we wish. It's been a few months since that emotional exchange, and while we're not instantly best friends again, there's this unspoken truce hanging in the air like a tentative peace treaty. We've started texting more, usually about the mundane stuff, her telling me about late-night diaper changes while I ramble about my dorm meals and exam stress. It's less about the big, dramatic moments now, more like a slow rebuilding of our friendship brick by brick. I remember last week, just a regular Sunday, when I decided to call her while I was huddled under my pile of textbooks, desperately trying to absorb the chapter on Shakespeare. I asked her how things were going with the baby, and she laughed a little, telling me how she finally managed to get him to sleep without having to rock him for an hour first. The way she spoke, with this mix of pride and exhaustion, made me smile. Here's this woman I grew up with, and despite all the chaos, she's learning and evolving into a mother like I always knew she could. It hit me hard in a way I wasn't prepared for, realizing she's not just my sister anymore, she's a whole person living in a completely different world now. A little later, the conversation turned more serious, as it often does when we start to dig deeper. She admitted she still felt a bit lost, caught between who she used to be and who she's becoming. While I sat there, I remembered all those times I felt like I was drowning in university pressure, how lost and unseen I sometimes felt amidst it all. It clicked in that moment, as much as I felt like I had to protect my own space and sanity, she was still navigating her ocean of changes alone, just like I was with mine. Instead of feeling defensive or put upon again, I found myself wanting to help her, not out of obligation but because I could understand that loneliness. I suggested we set a regular time to check in on each other, maybe a video call where we could let our guard down and just be ourselves, sisters trying to figure it all out together, even from a distance. I wasn't sure if she'd agree, but surprisingly, she loved the idea. Let's not just do this when things get hard. Let's make it a thing, you know? She responded, and it reminded me how vital that connection is, even if it's just to hear her voice or see her face, that familiarity brings comfort. Now, we're weekly catch-up buddies, and it doesn't always look how I imagined a sisterly bond should be, less about shared rooms and secrets, more about shared struggles and laughter over video calls. I've started to realize that love isn't only about proximity, sometimes, it's about showing up, even if it's from 1,000 miles away. We're both still in our own battles, making our own choices, but I feel like we're slowly learning to cheer for each other from the sidelines, which in itself can be a form of love. Sometimes, I think back to that tension-filled moment when I refused her request, wondering how differently I might have reacted. But for now, I'm thankful for the path that's opened up between us. It feels fragile, but in this world that sometimes seems so disconnected, it's like a breath of fresh air, reminding me that there's always room for understanding, if only we let ourselves be honest with one another. As the months rolled on, I found myself reflecting on that pivotal evening more often than I imagined I would. The crisp fall air had settled in, and with it, the leaves painted the campus in rich hues of orange and gold. It was the kind of season where students were buried in their textbooks, but I often let my mind drift to the complex tapestry of my relationship with my sister. What that confrontation had unveiled wasn't just frayed emotions but a shared, unspoken desire for connection amidst our chaos. Sophie had oscillated between feelings of empowerment and despair since becoming a mother, and I admired her ferocity. She was fiercely independent, yet there were nights I could almost hear her struggling through the silence, the kind where a baby would cry in the background, overlaid with muffled sighs. I could picture her tucked away in her tiny apartment, surrounded by baby toys and half-folded laundry, trying to balance motherhood with her ambitions. It made me think about how every time she called, her voice teetered between needing help and not wanting to burden me. I sometimes wondered if I was too self-absorbed, caught up in my college life while she was knee-deep in late-night feedings and toddler tantrums. There was guilt wrapped around each of those thoughts. Now, whenever I visited her, I tried to walk the fine line between being supportive and not overwhelming myself. I remember one evening as I sat in her living room, the walls plastered with graduation photos of us, two sisters in cap and gown, faces beaming with pride. It hit me then, our lives were so intertwined, yet we had become strangers in some way. I didn't realize how lonely I would feel, you know? She admitted while bouncing her baby on her knee, a wistful look crossing her face. I could barely respond. Taken aback by the faint tremor in her voice, the realization that even in motherhood, her battles were hardly over. In those moments, I learned to listen more than I spoke. I'd sit quietly, absorbing her worries, her triumphs. Her description of a difficult day was often patterned with frustration followed by determination, and I couldn't help but respect her even more for it. I made it a point to visit regularly because even if I couldn't fully understand her experience, I wanted her to feel the presence of someone who cared. Sometimes, she'd simply need a break, those afternoons when I'd take the baby out for a stroll. We didn't always need to talk, our companionship lay in shared silence, the occasional laugh that ignited between us over something mundane, both of us savoring the distance we had navigated to reach this point. When winter rolled in, the air turned biting, and the city began to glow with holiday lights. I invited her to come stay with me in my dorm for a weekend, a little escape I thought we both could use. I felt a surge of exhilaration thinking about how my small space could host both her and my tiny niece, albeit temporarily. Sophie hesitated, her conventional worries creeping in about wrangling a restless child in a cramped room, but I could see her eyes light up at the prospect. At that moment, instead of scrambling for all the reasons why it might not work, I encouraged her, assuring her that we were both capable of this new adventure together, one that didn't revolve around cramped quarters. It felt freeing. The day she arrived was filled with light-hearted chaos. There were diaper bags on the floor, laughter replaced by a mixture of soft coos and squeals, and a dance between our different worlds. It was messy, not in the way of a fight but in a beautifully chaotic way that reminded me how far we had come. We each carved out our space among the clutter of pillows and toys, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, our conversation found its rhythm again. Sophie's laughter echoed around the room like a warm embrace, reminding us both that we could, indeed, build bridges instead of walls. We didn't solve everything, but that's the beauty of life, isn't it? It's not about having the answers at every turn, but rather about embracing the uncertainties together. I've come to realize that paths can diverge and reconnect in the most unexpected ways. Perhaps it was just a weekend in my little dorm room, but it was a testament to our bond, evolving, redefining, standing strong enough to withstand the storms before us. As we tucked ourselves in that night, enveloped in the kind of shared warmth that felt rich in its tender familiarity, I knew we were on the brink of something beautiful. Our battles were still ours alone, but the acceptance dawned that we could face whatever came next, not remembered as the lost sisters, but rather as those learning to be there for one another, even from a distance. And in that, there was a kind of victory worth celebrating. I still remember the moment it all shifted for us. It was a Friday evening about a year ago when my husband Mark had that accident at work, an industrial mishap that left him with severe injuries and a scattering of medical equipment that now defined our home. I used to think I understood what love and partnership meant, but standing in our living room surrounded by bedside tables laden with an oxygen tank and other gadgets was a stark wake-up call. At first, I poured all of my energy into being his caretaker. I learned to check his machines, set up appointments, and manage medications, all while juggling my job and trying to maintain some semblance of our previous life. But as time blurred the lines between being a partner and a caretaker, I began to feel resentful. I could attribute this weight to many factors: anxiety about his health, the fear of losing the man I loved, and the nagging feeling that my own needs were fading into oblivion. When Mark mentioned that I should take over his daily routines with the equipment, something inside me snapped. It wasn't just the stress or the fatigue, it was fear of losing myself in this role forever. The argument began softly, a simple question about battery replacements for his nebulizer, and before I knew it, we were shouting. "Why can't you just take care of your equipment like an adult?" I blurted out in anger, each word dripping with frustration and a hint of betrayal. "I didn't sign up for this, Mark. I didn't ask for a second job." The look on his face was heartbreaking, hurt and confusion dancing in his eyes. In that moment, I saw the truth in his silence. I might be pulling away, but he felt more trapped than ever. The emotional distance between us grew palpable, a chasm forged by my unwillingness to shoulder everything. When he finally spoke, his voice wavered. "I didn't want any of this to happen either, but I need you." The words hung between us, heavy with the weight of our unspoken fears. I felt a rush of shame rolling over me at how my vulnerability came across. Was I the villain for wanting to step back or the victim of our circumstances? In the stillness that followed, I knew something had to change in how I handled the situation. I sat by the window later that night, listening to the distant sounds of life moving on outside while our little world felt suffocated by tubes and equipment. I needed to communicate, really communicate, about what I could handle versus where I felt frozen. It took time, but we found a way to talk it through, albeit imperfectly, acknowledging that my refusal wasn't about not wanting to help him but rather about taking care of myself too. So, I set boundaries, and he agreed to look into hiring a home health aide part-time. It was a delicate balance. I still aimed to support him, but I also stepped back enough to breathe. We've learned to navigate this uncharted territory together, even if the scars of that argument linger in the back of my mind. It isn't easy. But love, as it turns out, isn't just about caring for the other person, it's also about caring for oneself in the process. An update? Well, life is still a work in progress. We're still figuring things out, but we're trying to carve moments for just us, no equipment, just conversation, laughter, and the occasional silence that feels comforting rather than suffocating. It's strange how the mundanity of everyday life can intersect with the weight of profound change. Since that argument, I've found myself paying close attention to the little things, like the fresh scent of rosemary wafting from the oven as I cooked his favorite dish, or the way sunlight filtered through the curtains during our rare lazy mornings. I can still feel the tension wrapped around us like an unwelcome shroud, but I also sense the inertia of our relationship shifting, like a ship gradually correcting its course after a storm. One evening, we sat on the couch, the soft glow of the TV providing a backdrop to our quiet moment. I had just poured 2 glasses of wine, the Merlot colored deep as that lingering tension, when he turned to me, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "You know," he said, his voice low, "I've been thinking about how this whole mess with my health has affected us. My heart dropped at the words affected us because that phrase had become our elephant in the room. I don't want our love to feel like a burden to you, he continued, looking down at his hands, the ones that once felt so steady and strong. I could see the uncertainty etched in his brow, the shame that sometimes reared its head when we talked about his illness. Honestly, it has at times, I responded, trying to keep my tone even, though I could feel the stirrings of something that resembled guilt knotting my stomach. But it's not just you, you know? I sighed, searching for the right words. I felt lost, too, especially when I realize I can't take on everything. I want to support you, but I also need to take care of myself. A silence hung between us, heavy yet necessary, a moment where we were both just being. I thought about all those nights I had spent tiptoeing around his equipment, the sterile tubes and circuits that had invaded our space, feeling like guests in our own home. I get that, he finally murmured, lifting his gaze to meet mine, a flickering of understanding passing between us. It makes sense that you'd feel overwhelmed. I do, too. Sometimes, I wish I could just be normal. His admission stung, that longing for normalcy in a life where we had built a new reality marked by appointments and equipment. I reached for his hand, intertwining my fingers with his, letting the warmth travel up my arm. But we're not normal. Not anymore, and maybe that's okay. Over the next few weeks, we began to talk more openly, not just about his health but about what we wanted for ourselves and each other. We made it a point to have designated unplugged days where we left the medical equipment in the closet and focused solely on each other. We went for walks in the nearby park, shared dinners at our favorite restaurants, and rediscovered our shared love for board games. Each laugh felt like a reminder that we had not lost ourselves to this struggle, even if we were forever changed by it. While the scars of our past arguments still lingered, they transformed into shared reminders of how fragile yet resilient we could be. An update? Life continues to be a roller coaster, but we have learned to embrace the ride together, feeling every rise and fall with newfound appreciation. So yes, we're still navigating our way through this uncharted territory, but now, we do so hand in hand, finding joy in the mundane and strength in each other. And perhaps that sense of acceptance, of our transformed normal, is the truest expression of our love. As days turned into weeks, I found myself reflecting more on what it means to love someone who's facing health challenges while simultaneously learning to advocate for my own needs. I remember one quiet evening, the golden light of sunset spilling through the window, casting a warm glow across our cluttered living room littered with medical gear, the weight of everything settling heavily on my shoulders. It was one of those rare moments when we weren't talking about his health, but just sipping tea and listening to the sound of the kettle cooling down. It struck me that while I had learned to support him, I had also unintentionally built a little fortress around my own needs. I'd made my world so centered on him that I'd lost sight of my own joys. That realization felt like a weight lifting, but also a burden, like I was admitting to myself that I needed more than just being a caretaker. One night, after finishing a long day at work, I mustered the courage to bring it up during dinner. "Can we talk about something?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fluttering in my chest. He looked up from his plate, his fork paused mid-air, concern etched on his face. "Of course. What's on your mind?" The care in his eyes reassured me, urging me forward. "I feel like I don't even know who I am anymore outside of this." I gestured to the various medical items around the table. "I still love you, but some days, just being your caregiver feels like it's consuming me." He nodded, seemingly absorbing my words. "I thought you might be feeling that. I've noticed you've been quieter lately." A softness came over him, a recognition of my struggle that felt validating yet daunting. I took a deep breath, appreciating his understanding rather than defensiveness. "I don't want to be resentful. I want to be better." That's when he surprised me. "You have every right to feel the way you do. We're in this together, but you shouldn't feel like you have to shoulder everything. I mean, when was the last time we had a proper date? Just you and me?" His question lingered in the air, filled with possibilities. And from that simple inquiry, we started to carve out our us time in the chaos. It wasn't easy at first. The weight of that equipment always loomed over us, an uninvited guest in our plans. But we began to reclaim joy in small ways, an old movie marathon on the couch, board games that turned into laughter-filled evenings, and stargazing trips that fostered whispered dreams and sweet nothings. I'd find him in the kitchen trying out a new recipe or curled up with a book, making an effort to fill his own time unconditionally, which helped me to see the parts of him that existed beyond the illness. Still, I won't pretend there were no rough patches. Just last week, he struggled with a particularly tough day, and all my reminders to find joy seemed to slip away like sand through our fingers. I was tired, and the burden of his despair felt heavier than the mechanical equipment we'd come to know so well. I felt anger bubbling again, the situation feeling all too familiar, and I had to remind myself that it was okay to feel frustrated. I didn't want to retreat, but I also didn't want to be overwhelmed. It was during those moments that we both had to remember the tender balance of offering support while keeping our individual selves afloat. As we worked through those days, something shifted profoundly between us. Conversations weren't just about sharing burdens anymore, they became a space for authenticity. We learned that our love had to include vulnerability, not just in our struggles, but also in our triumphs and the mundane comfort of each other's company. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all, that it's okay to wobble and not always have it together, as long as we keep showing up for one another. We're not perfect, nor do we expect to be, but we're navigating with purpose, creating memories woven from resilience, laughter, and a shared commitment to honor our journey. Every step feels like we're writing not just a love story but also the tale of our growth and healing, together. It started as an innocent Saturday dinner at my place, a gathering of friends to unwind after a long week. I had just moved into this charming little apartment downtown, and my excitement to show it off had reached a peak. The scent of garlic and lemon wafted through the air as I grilled some delicious veggie skewers and sautéed shrimp for those who weren't adhering to special diets. Among the group was Lisa, my close friend since college, who had recently identified as pescatarian after not touching red meat for years. I respected her choice, but I knew her habits could sometimes waver in social settings, especially with good food around. It was almost comical how she would swoon over my culinary decisions, her large brown eyes lighting up with excitement at each platter I presented. As the evening unfolded with laughter and wine, I watched her dive into the shrimp with an enthusiasm that bordered on reckless. It was amusing until it suddenly struck me, an unsettling thought, as if a fog had drifted into my usually clear mind. "Hey, Lisa," I said, attempting to tease her lightly, "you know if you eat that, you might as well wave goodbye to your pescatarian label." Everyone laughed, but I was only half joking. I could see the glimmer of guilt in her eyes flicker and fade as she popped another shrimp into her mouth. The atmosphere shifted slightly, we all resumed our chatter, but I could sense her internal struggle bubbling beneath the surface, like the tension of a taut string ready to snap. Eventually, the night made its inevitable descent into messy revelations, and we all plopped down on the couch, a few drinks in hand. That's when she admitted it. "You know," she began hesitantly, "sometimes, I wonder if I really want to be pescatarian. The way everyone went to town on your food tonight. I felt like I was missing out." It was clear that she was wrestling with herself. She'd always been passionate about her choice for ethical reasons, yet every time she encountered temptation, she felt more and more conflicted. I sighed, struggling with the gravity of what I was about to say. I didn't want to sound harsh, but the truth was nagging at me. "Look, Lisa," I started, choosing my words carefully, "it's your choice, and I respect it, you know that. But if you can't resist shrimp on occasion and it's giving you this much anxiety, maybe you need to reevaluate why you're doing it. It's okay to admit you want to enjoy food, even if it doesn't fit into one label or another." The room fell quiet, the air thickening with unspoken sentiment, and I could feel the weight of my statement sinking into my gut. I could read her face like a book: confusion, frustration, anger. She snapped back, "So, it's my fault I ate meat? Thanks for making me feel like a monster." That stung, more than I expected it would. I felt my heart race, a familiar surge of defensiveness rushing up like a wave. I didn't want to be the villain in her narrative. "No, that's not what I meant," I stammered, my voice softening. "I just think it's important to own our choices, you know? If you're really struggling, maybe it's time to rethink how rigid you want to be." My intentions glimmered under the weight of her hurt, and I regretted my delivery. After a few moments of silence that felt like an eternity, she sighed deeply, the tension in her shoulders finally easing. "I guess. It just feels hard sometimes, navigating these choices in a world full of delicious foods. Maybe I need to reconsider how I label myself," she admitted, her voice quieter. I could sense we both were still processing. It was complicated, like a beautiful, messy tapestry of feelings engaged in an unresolvable dance. Later that night, as the remnants of our feast lay scattered around us and we finally drifted into lighter conversations again, I felt a poignant shift. I wasn't sure if my words had genuinely struck a chord, but something shifted in her demeanor. I realized that, in trying to signal her toward her own truth, I hadn't meant to reprimand her. Instead, it felt like we were both involved in a delicate dance of self-discovery, Two friends navigating the overpowering waves of guilt and desire in a chaotic sea of culinary choices. Months later, I received a text from her. "Hey, started trying some new things in the kitchen too, like I'm experimenting with being less strict with my vegetarianism. Thanks for that night, really." I smiled at the screen, relieved. It reaffirmed something vital. We weren't just friends tossing around labels, we were evolving together, reshaping our identities and learning to embrace the shades of gray instead of the rigid divisions we'd created. It was early evening when I received that text, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting my living room a soft gold. I could feel the warmth wrap around me like a familiar blanket, but there was a strange intensity bubbling inside. I was relieved, yes, but a part of me couldn't help but gnaw on the edges of that moment. The weight of our past conversation lingered. I remembered how tense it had felt after she took that first bite of steak at the grill, the way her eyes widened in disbelief and almost guilt, like she'd broken an unspoken rule. "You know it's not just steak, right? It's about understanding our choices," I'd said, words spilling out before I caught myself. I felt like a counselor and a friend at once, grappling with my own frustrations about rigidity and rules in a friendship that should have room for exploration. That night, our laughter had mingled with the smoke from the grill, but the air had also been thick with an unaddressed tension. I found myself worrying how our culinary debate had left her feeling. Yet here she was now, admitting that she had begun playing with those rigid lines we once underlined so boldly. I felt a sense of pride wash over me, an unexpected warmth to see her moving past the guilt that had shadowed her for months. I typed back, careful yet upbeat, "Really? That's awesome. It's about what feels right for you, not what we think it should be." I hit send and slumped back into the couch, heart racing slightly. It reminded me of that old saying, to be true to oneself, but how hard it can be. I often struggled with that truth too and realized that questioning things, especially our choices in domains as personal and emotive as food, was not just a trait of culinary exploration, it was a manifestation of a larger conversation about identity. I glanced at my half-empty plate from dinner, the remnants of my own dietary decisions. I'd been having seafood, mostly, saving myself from the more unpalatable choice of red meat. Was it that different from her shift? Is it really just about the food, or is it about comfort in the chaos of adulthood, growing, bending, and reshaping ourselves? Days turned into weeks, and those philosophical inquiries played in my mind as background music, mingling with the sweet aroma of my kitchen experiments. I swiped through my social media later and saw her post, an impeccable plate of sautéed vegetables with shrimp, vibrant and mouthwatering. The caption read, "Just because I love plants doesn't mean I can't embrace a bit of the sea, right?" I chuckled, an involuntary sense of triumph swelling in my chest. She was molding her narrative and allowing the waves of culinary joy to drown out the self-imposed storms of guilt. It made me want to push my boundaries too. Perhaps I could venture into vegetarian dishes beyond my comfort zone. Somewhere in that back and forth of support and experimentation, we found ourselves interwoven, each dish a tile in a mosaic of our friendship. I realized that her choice, or the softening of her restrictions, didn't negatively impact our connection, it only deepened it. One weekend, we agreed to cook together again, a full few hours reserved for culinary exploration. As we diced and chopped, we talked freely, about our lives, our aspirations, the uncertainty swirling around us like the steam from the pans. By the time we tasted our third dish, the vulnerability we both carried transformed into a playful banter. "So if I make my famous crab cakes next week, can you handle the temptation?" she teased, and I couldn't help but throw my head back in laughter. Temptation? Oh, come on. I'll still be here, side by side, in this delicious gray zone, I replied. And suddenly, it felt less like a debate and more like exploration, a shared journey through choices seasoned with genuine care and understanding. I leaned on the counter, ready to whisk my hands into the next dish, feeling our friendship getting thicker, hearty like the meal we were about to create. Life is messy, and the lines are often blurred, but in that kitchen, amidst laughter and the inviting aroma of shared meals, I felt alive, truly, deeply alive. I couldn't predict the future, or if she'd return to a stricter vegetarian path, but I realized it hardly mattered. We were simply living, exploring, shaping ourselves with each meal shared, every step an invitation to experience the beautiful chaos together. That afternoon, with sunlight pouring through the kitchen window, I felt an overwhelming sense of connection to my friend. As I set about chopping vegetables, bright peppers, fragrant garlic, and crisp spinach, I could practically sense her presence beside me. We had planned to conjure up a new recipe together. We called it meal assembly gone wild, an excuse to toss everything we had on hand into one big bowl and see what happened. It wasn't just about food, it was a metaphor for where we were in life, melding our separate journeys into something vibrant, unique, and delicious. Just as I reached for the onions, my thoughts drifted back to that fateful dinner months ago, when she had taken a forkful of the salmon, her eyes wide with disbelief. "This is so good, but what if I regret it later?" she asked, laughter bubbling just under the surface of her conflicted expression. Now, with each clatter of the pan and splash of sauce, I realized we had both changed since that night. We had stepped away from rigid definitions and found invigorating freedom in playing with the rules. "Hey, maybe we could throw in some shrimp for a little kick?" I called out to her, eyebrows raised playfully. She hesitated for a moment, as if weighing the imaginary scales of her vegetarianism before nodding eagerly. "Yeah, why not? Let's do it." And just like that, we tumbled deeper into our culinary exploration, an unwritten agreement forming in the air between us, that this space was safe for experimentation, for letting go, for embracing the pleasure of the unexpected. As the aromas mingled and enveloped us, rich and enticing, I caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window, her smile wide as she mixed ingredients with wild abandon. It echoed the joyful spirit this journey had instilled in her. There was a new confidence in the way she moved, a contrast to the uncertainty that used to shroud her culinary choices. I felt proud, not just of our dish, but of her bravery to navigate the ambiguity of her identity. It felt like we both were adding layers to ourselves, new textures and flavors that complemented who we had always been at our core. "Do you think this would make a good post for the blog?" she asked, tossing a playful strand of hair over her shoulder. She loved sharing our culinary escapades online, a creative outlet that gave her an avenue to connect with others exploring similar paths. I nodded, grinning. "Absolutely. And we can call it Dancing with Delicacies, a pescatarian journey or something cheeky like that." Our laughter rang through the kitchen, warm and easy, a reminder that moments like these were worth cherishing. As we plated our creation, the vibrant colors inviting and bold, I felt a warmth blossom in my chest, a realization that this friendship had transformed into something richer than I ever anticipated. We had wandered outside the boundaries we once imposed on each other and found a deeper bond through the art of sharing meals. It was about honoring our individual choices while still celebrating every messy, beautiful meal we pulled together. Later, as we sank into the clinking of forks against plates, I took a moment to observe her. She was savoring each bite, letting flavors linger on her tongue as memories intertwined with our laughter. I suddenly felt the urge to share something, an acknowledgement of our journey, our vulnerability. "You know," I said, looking straight at her, "I didn't want to tell you how to feel about your food choices, but I did want you to know it was okay to explore. You remind me that life doesn't come wrapped up in neat packages." Her gaze softened, and after swallowing, she replied with a thoughtful nod. "And you remind me that it's okay to step beyond the labels we put on ourselves. This journey with you is exactly what I needed, to stop fearing the gray areas." Our conversation ebbed and flowed across the table just like the food, intertwining and rich. As we cleaned up, I reflected on how, for each forkful we took, it was more than just a fusion of flavors, it was a celebration of friendship, acceptance, and the beautiful mess of growing together. I didn't know where her culinary exploration would lead next or how her relationship with food and identity would continue to evolve, but I felt a sense of calm in the uncertainty. We were both learning to embrace the chaos and quirks of life without the need for rigid definitions, a true friendship woven tighter with every meal shared. I never thought my child's third birthday party would turn into a battleground for family loyalty, but here we are, and I suppose I should have seen it coming. Ever since I got married to Max, it felt like I stepped into an episode of a reality show, his family always hovering in the background, ready to weigh in on every little thing we did. From the names we picked for our kids to what we served for Thanksgiving dinner, there was always some kind of criticism, but nothing could have prepared me for the bombshell that came the day they called my daughter a mistake. I remember it so clearly. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Max had invited his parents over to discuss our plans for Mara's birthday. They'd been hinting for weeks about a big family celebration, but as we sat around our tiny kitchen table, the conversation took a harsh turn. Someone mentioned how it was so commendable of us to have a child after what they deemed a rushed marriage. The words hung heavy in the air like a thick fog, and then, like some sick twist of fate, his mother chimed in, "Well, at least Mara wasn't an oops. What a lovely mistake she could have been." I could feel my stomach drop, like I'd been punched in the gut. The room went silent except for the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. Max's eyes widened in surprise, then quickly shifted to mine, searching for my reaction. I could feel my face blazing hot, and all I could think was, how could they say that about our daughter? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. I hadn't expected this utter disregard for Mara's existence from people who claimed to love her. That was it for me. I decided then and there they wouldn't be invited to the party. And soon, the tension began to simmer beneath the surface at home, even as I came up with a smaller, more intimate celebration, inviting just my parents and a few close friends. Max was torn. He wanted to keep the peace with his family. "It's just one party," he said, his voice low and hesitant. But for me, it was so much more than that. I didn't want to celebrate our child's life in the presence of people who believed she was anything less than a miracle. A week later, as the day approached, I could see the disappointment etched in Max's face, and it hurt me more than I expected. I felt guilty, like I was drawing a line in the sand and forcing him to choose between his family and our daughter. But how could I compromise on our child's self-worth? The day of the party, our apartment was bright and cheerful, adorned with colorful balloons and little decorations that I had put up with care. As I watched Mara laugh and play, completely oblivious to the chaos surrounding her lineage, my heart swelled. I had made the right call, I felt it in my bones. But that night, after Mara was tucked in bed, Max laid beside me in silence, tension building like a tightrope waiting to snap. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're my family, you know. I wish you could just see things from their perspective." I turned to face him, my heart aching. But they are not considering her perspective. She deserves to feel wanted and loved, and they showed me that they're not capable of that. It felt like a rift that opened up between us, one that was born from love but was fueled by pain and misunderstanding. I wanted to scream, to shake him into understanding my point of view, but all I could do was whisper back, "I'm sorry, Max. I can't pretend that their words didn't hurt. And I can't believe they deserve a front row seat to her life." In the weeks that followed, conversations became more strained. I noticed Max's absence during Mara's bedtime stories, his mind clearly elsewhere as he wrestled with unspoken loyalties. Part of me wished I could send a message to his parents, to boldly let them know how their words affected me, how deeply they cut into Mara's innocence. But the other part of me recognized that family dynamics are messy and complicated, often filled with an intricate web of expectancies. I felt lost, uncertain if I did the right thing or truly created an even bigger problem. A few months passed, and I noticed some shifts. Max started standing up for us more. He wouldn't answer every call from his parents, learned to set boundaries that had never been there before. I hoped he was realizing that family is more than blood, it's about respect and love. Some days I still wonder about that invitation I didn't send and how it might have changed the dynamics. We're a family of our own now, and I need to believe we're strong enough to weather any storm, as long as we can shield Mara from any hurtful words. It's an ongoing journey, one filled with bumps and roadblocks, but each day seems to get a bit clearer. Among the chaos, I found something resembling peace, a conviction that my daughter deserves only the most loving, encouraging voices in her life, even if it means disappointing those who can't see her worth. As I lay in bed, I realized that I might not have invited them for this birthday, but I still hope that one day, they may come to understand just how important Mara is, not just to me, but to them too. As I lay in bed, that weighty silence pressing around me, I felt the soft rise and fall of my daughter's breath in the next room. Every small, rhythmic sigh brought me back to the moment we had first brought her home. The world had been so bright and new, I remember cradling her tiny form, whispering promises that I'd always protect her. Yet here I was, days away from her 6th birthday, grappling with the collision of love and hurt. I could still hear the expression on Simon's mother's face when she callously referred to Mara, a slip of the tongue that cut deeper than I think anyone realized. She was a mistake, she had said, her voice dripping with disdain. I sat there, frozen, my heart racing as her words echoed around the table, bouncing between Simon and me, thickening the air until it felt suffocating. We had been discussing the party arrangements, planning a simple backyard gathering with balloons, cake, and giggles. But that day, the festivities turned sour. I had planned on inviting his family, a gesture of goodwill, a way to show Mara that she belongs in this larger family picture. But I couldn't shake that cruel labeling, it festered like an open wound. In Simon's eyes, I saw the confusion morph into fury, his hands clenched into fists on the table, and I felt torn, an invisible tether connecting my love for him and my fierce protection of Mara. Maybe that's when I truly understood, like some slivers of light filtering through clouds, that I had to draw a line. I didn't write the invitations. I couldn't bear the thought of watching his family walk through our front door, smiling, hands outstretched, blissfully unaware of the pain they had hurled at us with such careless ease. I wanted my daughter to feel cherished in all her glorious imperfections, to celebrate the little joys of life without a looming shadow of resentment. Even if it meant disappointing Simon, who believed that family bonds could weather storms, I clung to the notion that Mara's well-being trumped all else. The days ticked down to the party, each passing hour wrought with a heavy uncertainty. Thoughts spiraled like leaves in a whirlwind. What if Simon's family never saw beyond that mistake? What if they became permanent whispers in Mara's ears? I longed to wrap her in a bubble of joy, where only kind words and laughter seeped through. On the eve of her birthday, I set up in the backyard, transforming it into a wonderland. Brightly colored banners waved in the gentle breeze, and the aroma of freshly baked cupcakes lingered in the air. Mara awoke the next morning with a delighted squeal, her eyes sparkling with the promise of adventure. As she bounced through the house, I couldn't help but smile. I had chosen love, had crafted a day where she could simply be a kid, wrapped in the simple joys of friendship, adventures, and her favorite unicorn balloons. When the guests arrived, friends from preschool, neighbors, and my own family, the atmosphere shifted, blooming with laughter and joy. I watched as they tossed confetti and held Mara in their arms, inspecting the cake as if it were the most precious of treasures. Each smile sparked something within me, a flame igniting my heart. Simon arrived late, his expression a mixture of joy and perhaps a shadow of disappointment. After the guests left, he cornered me by the patio, frowning. "You know they're hurt you didn't invite them," he said, a hint of frustration edging his voice. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of that fierce protective instinct I had felt so strongly. I can't have them in our lives if that's how they see our daughter. She needs to know she's not a mistake, not to anyone. The silence expanded between us, a hesitation before release. Finally, after what felt like ages, he nodded quietly, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "I understand," he said, his voice softer now. I could see he was weighing the strands of love and obligation, questioning the dynamic of family ties. As the dusk settled, I held Mara in my arms again, her laughter echoing in sweet harmonies through the space between us. I had chosen this moment, this sacred time, to nourish what mattered most. Maybe the future would lead to reconciliation with his family, to a day when they'd see what a miracle our Mara truly is, but until then, I could live with the uncertainty. She would thrive in the warmth of acceptance, surrounded by those who valued her light, and that was enough for me. Love isn't always perfect, but it is a journey worth every choice made along the way. As I laid her down for the night, I stroked her hair and whispered into the stillness, "You are so loved, my sweet Mara. No mistakes here, only magic." And as I curled up beside her, I realized that sometimes, choosing peace over family ties can be an act of love too. The soft glow of the nightlight cast gentle shadows across the room, and the rhythmic sound of Mara's breathing was like a soothing lullaby, anchoring me in this moment of deep reflection. I had spent months wrestling with the decision to exclude my husband's family from our lives, especially during milestones that felt etched in stone like a birthday. On the surface, it should have been about balloons, laughter, and cake, but the words they had hurled at my precious daughter still echoed in my mind, sharp and unforgiving. "A mistake," they had said, as if she were a typographical error written in the generation before her, a phrase that had become an unwelcome anchor, dragging down my resolve and filling me with a quiet ache. I remembered the tight smiles plastered on faces that should have radiated joy on my wedding day, the strained conversations at family gatherings, where I felt like a puzzle piece that just wouldn't fit. But it was Mara's laughter, pure and innocent, that sparked a flicker of rebellion within me. I'd refused to let that laughter be tainted by their negativity. I wanted her to grow up enveloped in acceptance and love, not the brand of aloofness their cutting comments seemed to carry like a silent banner. As the nighttime shadows danced along the walls, my thoughts circled back to the upcoming party. I pictured all the faces of friends and loved ones who would uplift Mara, gleaming with encouragement and warmth, and I recognized that the absence of her grandparents and aunts was a sacrifice worth making, not just for her, but for my own spirit too. Yes, sacrificing those familial ties felt heavy, but it also felt like a reclamation of all that was sacred. I wanted to ensure that our space remained a sanctuary, one where no one was allowed to question her value, a fortress built from laughter and joy. As I hugged her to me, I flipped through memories of my own childhood filled with unconditional love. The thought that my daughter might walk a different path because of a cold family history sent a shiver through me. Yet everything in me screamed that she was not, nor would ever be, a mistake, and it was a lesson I wanted to impart in bold letters across her soul. In the days that followed, I worked tirelessly to plan her birthday celebration, the air buzzing with activity as I selected vibrant decorations, hand-picked her favorite treats, and invited the people who genuinely cherished us. Friends from the neighborhood, parents of her schoolmates, all of whom viewed her not as an afterthought but as the miracle she truly was. The day of the party unfolded like a fairy tale, filled with warmth, cheer, and an overwhelming sense of belonging. Mara twirled in her favorite dress, her laughter ringing out like a melody that fulfilled every corner of my heart. I felt pride swelling within me, a protective shield against any whispers of doubt. Yet, in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake off the silence that stemmed from my husband's family. I had chosen to sever ties, and while I stood listening to the jubilant chorus of children and adults celebrating, there lingered a slight shadow of regret. I wondered if one day I would be able to explain my choice to Mara without burdening her with the pain that had colored my decisions. Would her family ever come to understand the joy they had missed out on? I let those thoughts drift as the candles were lit, and I watched her make her wish. And in that moment, as she closed her eyes, I realized that love sometimes meant setting boundaries, even when they extended far beyond the people who raised you. With a soft smile, I tucked that lingering sadness away for another time, deciding that for now, the warmth of friendship would be enough. After all, in this new journey, I could see clearly that mistakes were only what we made them, and my daughter? She was a beautiful unblemished canvas, waiting to be painted with love and acceptance, not the scars of hurtful words. As the day closed, with laughter echoing through our home, it dawned on me that family, in all its forms, could still be a tapestry woven from heartstrings that stretched far and wide, even if some threads were lost along the way. You know that feeling when you're sitting at a bar, nursing an overpriced whiskey, and you think, today couldn't possibly get any worse? Well, that was me last Tuesday. I had just wrapped up a job interview for what I thought was my dream position. I'd meticulously prepared for weeks, so naturally, when I bombed the final question, I felt like I'd just thrown my future out the window. As I stared into my glass, feeling sorry for myself, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a Facebook message from Rachel, one of my old coworkers. We hadn't spoken since I left that job, and if I'm being completely honest, I wasn't super eager to hear from her. Rachel had a knack for being overly critical. She'd always found a way to step in when she thought I was screwing up, usually in front of the whole team. A real joy at 9 a.m. on a Monday, right? So, I hesitated before opening the message. Hey. I just saw your post about that interview. I hope you did well. Just in case you need any references, let me know. Sweet, right? But a part of me stiffened. I didn't want her help. I needed to distance myself from the toxicity of that workplace, and Rachel was absolutely a part of it. Fueled by whiskey, I typed out a response that I probably shouldn't have. Thanks, but I'd prefer not to reach out. You and I never quite saw eye to eye at work. I hit send, taken aback by my own boldness. What was I thinking? The warmth in my cheeks reminded me I was still processing rejection from the interview, and maybe I had a little more to drink than I should have. The reply came quicker than I anticipated. What do you mean? I thought we had a good working relationship. It felt like a slap to the face. Good working relationship? Seriously? Something snapped in me. I was just done. I fired back, honestly, I don't like you, Rachel. We didn't have a good relationship, you constantly made me second-guess everything, and frankly, I was relieved when I left. There it was, louder than my own thoughts. After a moment of silence, I realized the bar had gone quiet, and I could feel the eyes from a couple of the patrons on me. Oh great, now I was the spectacle. Rachel didn't retaliate, but her typing dots popped up and disappeared. My stomach twisted. Why had I opened this Pandora's box? Finally, her response was blunt. Wow, I didn't realize I affected you so much. Part of me wanted to take it back, to feign a moment of weakness and resolve it like adults do. But another part wanted to just bask in the clarity of my honesty, even if it terrified me. That night, as I replayed our conversation, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and guilt. Maybe I didn't need to have said it in such a public way, but honestly, I had operated under denial for too long, and now the truth was hanging in the air, an exposed nerve I couldn't ignore. In a moment of vulnerable self-reflection, I decided I needed to accept my feelings, however harsh they were. The overwhelming urge to redact was met with a deep-seated understanding. I had finally set a boundary. Fast forward a week, and I learned Rachel had shared our exchange with the whole office, whether out of petty revenge or as some sort of misguided lesson in accountability. The office chatter spiraled, and I became that girl who told off her coworker. It wasn't exactly the outcome I envisioned, but it did bring some clarity. I realized a significant part of my discomfort in the workplace wasn't just Rachel's critiques, but how I allowed her voice to overshadow mine. I had a choice now. I could remain silent about the kind of work environment I wanted, or I could advocate for it fiercely. I chose the latter. Ultimately, it became a turning point. Being honest set me free in ways I didn't expect. Sure, I had momentarily alienated myself from a crowd, perhaps dealing that infamous blow of social discomfort, but sometimes, severing ties is what leads to new beginnings. I sat down at my desk that following Monday, and for the first time, I felt lighter, empowered to not just question but also dictate my worth, and honestly, isn't that what we all strive for after walking away from a toxic environment? In its own way, perhaps I had started stirring the pot, and now my own recipe was coming together. Who knew a drunken confrontation could pave the way for something entirely unexpected? I took a deep breath and settled into that newfound empowerment, my fingers dancing over the keyboard as I tackled emails with a clarity I'd lacked before. The awkwardness from Friday's confrontation still buzzed softly in the back of my mind, but surprisingly, it didn't weigh me down. If anything, it emboldened me to navigate my workday with a sharper sense of who I was and what I wanted. The air felt different, as if I'd shaken off dust that had settled too thickly over the months spent tiptoeing around the opinions of others. Still, it wasn't as simple as I had hoped. I glanced up occasionally, my former coworker, Liam, hovering around the break room, bantering with others. There was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. Some friends avoided his gaze while others awkwardly laughed a little too loudly at his jokes. And then there was me, torn between relief and guilt. Yes, I'd said what I had to, but watching him try to fit back into the dynamic with forced smiles tugged at something within me. Was I the one who had thrown the first stone, or had I merely uncovered something that was always rotting beneath the surface? After the day stretched on, I found myself in a meeting where he made a comment that was, quite frankly, absurd. The room contained an array of reactions, nervous giggles, suppressed eye rolls, but I felt it sharper. The urge to call him out again gnawed at my insides, but this time, I held my tongue. The last confrontation had rocked the boat enough. My job wasn't worth the backlash of becoming the office pariah. I decided instead to be the observer, taking mental notes of how people interacted with one another, how toxic conversations shifted like the tides, and recognizing that I was free to swim away from that shoreline. Later, as I was packing up for the day, a nagging thought played in my head: was my confrontation worth the unraveling it caused? It felt good to speak my truth, but I didn't want to spiral into another black hole of conflict. I let it roll around for the rest of the evening, along with the slower moving hum of my thoughts. I got home and poured myself a glass of wine, sank into my couch, and turned on a show that I knew would soothe my restless brain. Then I picked up my phone and scrolled until I found that subreddit I frequented. As I typed out my experiences, framing it just right to elicit some feedback, I felt a tide of hope. Maybe I wasn't an asshole for wanting respect, but even writing those words out made me realize the complexity of it all. We are social creatures, but we often forget that the cost of fitting in can sometimes be the highest price of all. The next day, I entered the office, buoyed by the feedback I'd already received from various users on Reddit. Many encouraged me to keep being true to myself, while others raised valid points that got me thinking. Maybe with subtlety rather than outright honesty, there could be a middle ground. Just then, I spotted Liam at the far corner of the break room, isolated but not entirely alone. He was talking to Sarah, an old friend of mine from another department. My heart sank slightly. Was this the moment we should talk about what happened? I hesitated, my mind racing. Did I really want to address it like adults? I noticed Sarah laugh at something he said, and with it came a twinge of jealousy I didn't know I had. Suddenly, I craved closure, but I wouldn't allow myself to be the one to initiate it. My ego clashed with my desire for peace, but as I moved to pour a cup of coffee, I caught Liam's eye. He smirked, and something shifted inside me, something dark lifted, and instead of feeling anger, I felt a wave of sympathy wash over me. Maybe he was just navigating his way through this strange office dynamic as I was. I took a sip of my coffee, suddenly deciding that I wouldn't avoid him anymore. Maybe once bitten, twice shy, but I was done living like the awkward chess piece caught between an unyielding game. For better or worse, the echoes of that night still lingered, but instead of defining what I did wrong, they ignited a new curiosity. As I made my way back to my desk, I felt lighter, braced by the possibilities that lay ahead. After all, if I could be strong enough to voice my dislike, Then maybe I could also find the courage to create new connections. I smiled softly at the thought, understanding now that growth often springs from the messy and uncomfortable feelings we try to push aside. It was about time for all of us to step up or move aside. As the days passed, I started noticing little shifts around me that reflected my newfound resolve. I interacted with coworkers I had previously ignored, the ones whose small talk seemed trivial in the shadow of my ex-coworkers' drama. Each interaction was a gentle electric charge, awakening a part of me that had long felt dormant. One afternoon, during a lunch break that felt too quiet, I joined a few colleagues who usually sat at a different table. They were discussing a recent movie, laughter punctuating their conversation. Without thinking much, I chimed in with my own take on it, surprised at how easily my words flowed. They welcomed my input as if I had always belonged there, and with each laugh shared, my confidence grew. I began to realize that I could carve out my space without pretending to be someone I wasn't. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. I still had to navigate the aftermath of that confrontation with my ex-coworker, Julian. Word had spread through the office grapevine. I could almost feel the unspoken questions pulsing in the air whenever I passed by my old teammates. "Did you really say that? You called him out?" I felt their curiosity like heat against my skin, and sometimes it was unsettling. One morning, I found a message from Julian, through an app we once used to communicate during work. His words were careful and almost businesslike. "Can we talk? I'd like to clear the air." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. On one hand, I wanted to dismiss him completely, unwilling to reopen that wound. Still, a part of me felt compelled to understand what he might say. Maybe he was genuinely sorry, or maybe he'd warped the narrative to cast himself as the victim. Deciding to meet felt like a reckless gamble. When I arrived at the cafe, I spotted him at a corner table, his posture almost defensive, hands clasped tightly over his coffee cup. I chose not to sit opposite him and instead settled into the chair next to him, creating a barrier, perhaps as a quiet reminder that this space we had once shared had fundamentally changed. Julian opened with a hesitant compliment about my courage during that night. "I wasn't expecting you to say anything, honestly," he said, and I sensed a mixture of surprise and irritation in his tone. "People usually just let me walk over them." I couldn't help but scoff, the sound escaping before I could rein it in. "You know, you've made a habit of stomping on others to get ahead. Maybe that's why no one stood up to you before." The challenge hung in the air, and our eyes locked, a shared moment of confrontation that felt strangely invigorating. His expression shifted, caught between irritation and a hint of self-awareness. "I didn't realize I was coming off like that," he said slowly, as if genuinely processing my words. We continued to talk, the tension ebbing and flowing, dissecting the past while carefully avoiding reliving it. I could still sense the defensive walls he held up, but there were flickers of vulnerability, almost like he was testing the waters to see if I would lash out again. We spoke for nearly an hour, and I found myself, surprisingly, feeling some degree of empathy for him. Here was a person who, despite his shortcomings, was human and complex. We parted ways that day without any grand gestures of reconciliation, just a simple nod of recognition that we had laid a few cards on the table. As I walked away, the weight on my chest lifted a little more. In the weeks that followed, I realized how much my decisions had shifted the dynamics of my workplace, taking the first step toward forging a community that felt less about keeping up appearances and more about honest connections. It opened doors to deeper conversations infused with real understanding. I found myself surrounded by allies rather than competitors, and we collaborated on projects with a synergy I had never experienced before. Reflecting on that night now, I can't help but marvel at how a single act of clarity and confrontation, however messy it was, laid the groundwork for a healthier environment. Sometimes we must be uncomfortable to unearth the beauty in our connections. Julian sent an unexpected message weeks later, just a single thumbs-up emoji after I presented a project idea we both worked on. I chuckled at how far we'd come, and in that moment, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. There's strength in authenticity, I realized, and I was finally ready to embrace it. I used to believe that family gatherings were supposed to be filled with laughter and joy, yet somehow, our last holiday dinner descended into chaos. Let me set the scene. It was Thanksgiving, and I was in charge of dessert, my mother's famous chocolate chip cookies being the star of the show. They were known far and wide among the family as the best cookies you could ever get your hands on, golden brown, gooey chocolate bits, and a hint of vanilla that danced on your palate like a warm hug. My brother-in-law, Keith, had always been a little difficult, often bringing an air of annoyance when he was around, but this year was different. He showed up late, barely acknowledged anyone, and then proceeded to complain about everything: how the turkey was dry, how nobody ever made the side dishes he liked, and the weather being freezing. I tried to shake off the irritation and focus on the food, but with each comment, my blood started to simmer a little more. When it finally came time for dessert, I served up the cookies, my heart racing as I encouraged everyone to dig in. But, of course, Keith couldn't help himself. He picked one up, looked at it with disdain, and said, "Of course, you made your mom's cookies again. Can't you ever try anything new?" My heart sank. I felt the anger rise within me, but I took a deep breath. Instead of reacting, I smiled tightly and offered him a cookie. This only seemed to amuse him. "You're really giving me a cookie? I'd expect nothing less from you. Guess you don't know how to handle criticism." His laughter rang out, a harsh note in the otherwise merry atmosphere. The hubbub of family chatter quieted for a moment, and I could feel all eyes on us. I held my ground, a mixture of disbelief and outrage bubbling beneath the surface. "Yeah, Keith, but at least I know how to bake," I shot back, half joking, half hurt. The family chuckled nervously, unsure whether to side with me or with their amusingly cynical cousin-in-law. As I stood there, cookie in hand, I felt this strange urge to actually give him what he wanted. I walked over to him, handed him the cookie with a challenging smile, and said, "Here, have a cookie, and maybe it'll sweeten your mood." To my surprise, he grabbed it, still smirking, and took a big bite. In that moment, I felt the tension shift, although I wasn't quite sure how. I'd fueled his rudeness, sure, but maybe I'd also diffused it just a little. The night went on, laughter returning, but my heart still felt bruised. I couldn't shake off the question: did I let him get away with his bad behavior, or did I actually stand up for myself? The next day, I found myself checking on a Reddit community, unsure of how to process my feelings. AITA for giving my Bill his favorite cookie when he was being rude? I typed into the post, desperate for validation, or at least some perspective. The comments flooded in, with people defending me and others pointing fingers at my choice of dessert diplomacy. It seemed I had become somewhat of an unwilling instigator in our family drama. As I read through the responses, I realized that navigating family dynamics is akin to walking a tightrope. You either fall flat or somehow manage to find your balance, and perhaps in that chaotic moment, I had done both. It wasn't just about the cookies, it was about setting boundaries, about standing my ground while still trying to maintain a sense of family cohesion. In the end, maybe I had learned that sometimes sweetness is a necessary ingredient, even when mixed with a little bitterness. As I settled back into my chair, the afternoon sun streaming through the kitchen window, I found myself reflecting on the tiny whirlwind that had spun out of a simple cookie. It had all started innocently enough. My brother-in-law, Eric, was visiting with my sister, and I had baked his favorite chocolate chip cookies as a welcome gesture. Everyone was buzzing with laughter and chatter when Eric walked in, eyes lighting up at the sight of the cookie platter like a kid in a candy store. But the atmosphere shifted almost instantly when he made a snide comment about my choice of music playing softly in the background, mocking it as old people stuff. The laughter died, hovering awkwardly in the air, and I could feel the unspoken tension brewing around the room, a recipe for disaster. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to brush it off and carry on with the festivities, but another part of me felt stung, like a nagging bee buzzing in my ear that I couldn't swat away. As the minutes passed, more jabs followed, with Eric sarcastically commenting on everything from the decorations to the fact that I'd made too many cookies. Meanwhile, my sister wore a tight-lipped smile, clearly torn between her brother and her loyalty to me. I felt myself boiling under the surface, wanting to shout back, to remind him that we weren't in high school anymore, but I held my tongue, choosing instead to act with what I hoped was grace. Finally, with a heavy heart and a sigh, I picked up a cookie, carefully placed it on a napkin, and walked over to where Eric sat, acting as if I were making a friendly gesture. "Hey, Eric," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil inside, "I thought you might like one of these. The extra chocolate chips might make it sweeter than your comments today." I handed him the cookie, watching his surprise morph into a frown. His eyes narrowed for a second, and I could almost see the gears turning in his head. Was he going to take the bait or rise above it? To my astonishment, he took the cookie with a mixture of annoyance and confusion, a silent acknowledgement of the jab but also an acceptance of the olive branch. I watched as he took a hesitant bite, and for a fleeting moment, our eyes locked, and I wondered if this was the beginning of a truce or merely a temporary ceasefire. The room felt heavy but oddly charged. What I'd expected to be a cookie throwdown turned into some strange form of diplomacy that none of us had anticipated, as laughter crept back into the air, albeit a bit quieter, and conversation resumed. Yet that moment of shared, albeit tense, sweetness lingered between us. I started to realize that maybe, just maybe, my act of defiance combined with kindness had opened a door for communication, creating a space to address the larger issues lurking beneath the surface of our family gatherings. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table, the cookie platter almost empty, a culinary victory mixed with emotional exhaustion. Over the next few days, I shared the story with close friends, weaving the threads of our tangled family fabric into a narrative that resonated with them. Some saw me as courageous, while others deemed the act a silly misstep. I began to ponder the consequences of my actions. Did I empower Eric to be even ruder, or had I planted a seed for change? It sparked a conversation between my sister and me later when I told her how I felt about Eric's behavior. Her refreshingly candid response helped clear some of the air between us. She recognized his sarcasm was a cover for his own insecurities. Perhaps we were all just trying to cope with familial pressures in our ways, finding humor where we could, even if it meant hurling cookies into verbal sparring matches. Now, weeks later, the sun still pours in through the kitchen window, and every time I bake those cookies, I can't help but smile at the absurdity of it all. The cookies became a symbol of a balance I was learning to create, a reminder that sometimes, a lighthearted jab mixed with sweetness can lead to deeper conversations that needed addressing. Eric still has his moments of arrogance, but every once in a while, he'll comment about the cookies with a hint of respect in his tone, and that's enough for me. It feels like we're navigating towards some sort of truce, where laughter and playful jabs can coexist without becoming a battlefield. Each cookie baked now carries the weight of that experience, a reminder that within family, love is often wrapped in layers of confusion, but a sprinkle of sweetness can break through the hard shell. It was one of those crisp autumn afternoons when I found myself scrolling through my phone, the sun filtering through the golden leaves and casting a warm glow across my kitchen. I had just baked a fresh batch of my famous chocolate chip cookies, the smell wafting through the house like a cozy blanket. It was peaceful, but I couldn't shake the lingering thoughts of Eric and our previous exchanges. The echo of his rude comments played in my mind, often mixed with his surprising candor since our cookie incident, which left me perplexed but hopeful. As I arranged those golden brown treats on the cooling rack, a sense of nostalgia washed over me. Eric and I had grown up laughing and fighting like siblings do, and my cookies had always been a point of pride for me in the family, something I could offer freely too. Both quell tensions and nurture connections. I remember my grandmother baking for us, how her treats were a salve to any quarrel, and it struck me then in that serene moment that perhaps I had inherited more than just her recipes. I had inherited a legacy of connection and communication, albeit a messy one through family feuds and the occasional burning oven mishap. Later that evening, after a long day, I found myself sitting on the back porch with my husband, Jake, discussing dinner plans when the distant sound of laughter caught my attention. It was Eric outside, tossing a football with my kids, the playful shouts blending with the soft rustling of leaves. A smile crept onto my face. There was something truly comforting about watching them, this chaotic ballet of family life unfolding in the fading light. And then, on a bit of a whim, I pulled out a plate of cookies and made my way to the yard, the soft crunch of fallen leaves beneath my feet. As I approached, I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me. Had that moment of tension with Eric really changed anything? I set the plate down on the picnic table, and as if sensing my uncertainty, Jake leaned in and whispered, "You've got this," sending a tiny spark of confidence rippling through me. "Hey, fellas. Who wants cookies?" I called, trying to keep my tone light. Eric glanced over, his expression shifting from playful to curious, and for a moment, I wondered if I imagined the slight flicker of tension in his brow. "Those look amazing," he said, moving towards the cookies with genuine enthusiasm. "Thanks. They're basically a family tradition now, aren't they?" I quipped, watching for his reaction. The kids rushed in before he could respond, their small hands reaching for the biggest cookies, and a fractional relief washed over me. But then Eric caught my eye, and the playful respect I had been longing for flickered there as he took a cookie and laid a teasing jab in my direction. "Just don't burn them, all right?" he said with a half smile. I was taken off guard but decided to take it in stride. "Only if you promise to stop pretending you're better than everyone else in the kitchen," I shot back playfully, trying to mirror his tone. For a moment, silence hung heavy, and I braced myself for the fallout, the jovial sounds of my kids momentarily fading into the background. But then, to my amazement, Eric laughed, throwing his head back as if he'd just heard the world's best joke. "Fine, truce. For the cookies, "I'll keep my arrogance in check," he replied, breaking into a grin. That exchange ignited something between us. The laughter seemed to bridge an unspoken divide, and I felt a weight lift. The moment was fleeting, but I knew in a way that I didn't fully understand yet, it was significant. As the evening grew darker, we sat outside. The kids played around us while we shared stories, our banter on the edge of sibling rivalry. I could see Eric relax, watch him drop the bravado just enough to be both earnest and playful. It felt as if every cookie was both a peace offering and a cornerstone, in a way I hadn't expected. And as I watched my family together, laughter mingling with words and playful jabs, something inside me settled. Maybe the path to understanding isn't straight, it's messy and wild, filled with cookies, black and white sibling disputes, and moments of clarity. I looked over at Eric, who from that moment on felt less like an opponent and more like family, in all its bittersweet chaos. It occurred to me then that sometimes a simple cookie really can change everything.